Take a pit stop for all things NASCAR with the Four Tire Change podcast. Here is your host, Dawson Iserlo.
We're back, another edition of the Four Tire Change podcast, and this week, what a race we had in Atlanta. Could it have been the greatest finish in NASCAR history? Could it have been the greatest race in NASCAR history? All that's up for discussion, and we'll get into a little bit of that today. Welcome back in. I'm Dawson Iserlo. We thank you for joining us here. Solo again today because, again, I got to get all my thoughts out on this Atlanta race. It was unbelievable. The finish was everything we could have wanted it. And this race, I had some real doubts about how this was going to go. And then it ended up being way better than anyone could have ever even predicted. So we'll talk about that. And then, of course, we'll preview Las Vegas coming up afterwards. But where do we even start? You know, the Xfinity race was on Saturday, and I really didn't enjoy it. Like, I thought there was a lot of, stagnant racing, a lot of single file. Nobody really seemed to be able to use the bottom lane effectively. And so I started to kind of temper my expectations. Go back a little bit. We talked about it last week. They reconfigured Atlanta a few years ago. It kind of gives you that semi-super speedway approach where, it's not full-on Daytona Talladega, but it's got a lot of the characteristics. It's very similar. And so, we knew that. We thought that was going to be exciting, and it really did a nice job the first few years. I think people were mostly impressed with how things worked out. There were concerns, though, as the racetrack aged, how would that kind of affect things? And then when we saw the Xfinity race, I started to go, okay, this is not good. But then we come out in the first few laps of the Cup race, and it just doesn't feel the same at all. Not even remotely close. Did want to also point out Michael McDowell wins the pole here. That's his first career pole. I've kind of mentioned it. I am a huge fan of his because of what he's, been able to accomplish with, at times real limitations equipment-wise. And so he continues to do that. So that was really cool to see. But overall, not only him getting on the pole, but we had some storylines going in. Guys who had slow starts last week, can any of them bounce back? What would that all look like? And all in all, we ended up having a really, unique first stage here where you had some guys jockeying for position. And again, they were able to use the bottom lane. Right away, though, lap 2, we get the wreck that takes out so many different cars and at least impacts them. A lot of them didn't get taken out, but certainly had damage there. So I'm really kind of talking about after that when they started to settle in and you saw those lanes go. But lap 2, Harrison Burton gets caught in it again. The luck there is just not happening. But, you had a ton of different cars impacted in that wreck. So that changes the dynamic. And instead of, though, making it, I thought at Daytona that first wreck kind of made everybody back off a little bit. I thought we had really good racing the rest of stage 1. And I wrote down specifically Michael McDowell was able to use all different lanes. He was able to go up to the high side to make passes. He was able to go down to the bottom. He ends up winning the first stage. And then when it starts stage 2, he's able to actually work his way from, 17th or 18th because he got shuffled back with some cars who stayed out, kind of go track position-wise. And he drove his way right back to the front. And again, it looks like he's going to be a real contender here. He ended up having some issues later on. The car kind of went away from him. I think he got too tight, and that kind of changed things. But you really saw a lot of stuff. I did want to mention also the end of stage 1. Kyle Busch gets into Hamlin a little bit. And that kind of seemed like that was going to be a thing, turned him. Luckily, Hamlin was able to come back from it. Hamlin was able to come back from multiple incidents in this race and still get himself a nice finish. So that was impressive. But look, more of the same in stage 2. 25 laps to go in stage 2. Byron and McDowell spin, going to green flag stops. It was really McDowell's fault here. He locks it up. But they keep it green. What a job by NASCAR. They get some, flack for calling cautions in certain spots. They kept that green. They didn't go with the caution. What that did was it didn't impact the green flag stops. Everybody was able to still go through because if the caution comes out there, you're going to have certain cars trapped 2 laps down. It's going to be really unfortunate. It's going to ruin a lot of those cars' races, really, for no doing of their own. But NASCAR keeps it green. They say, look, they were spun, but they're out of the racing surface. They're not putting anybody in danger. We'll let it go. McDowell and Byron are both able to kind of continue on, get to their pit stops, and move on with the rest of the race. And McDowell ended up getting back on the lead lap eventually as the lucky dog anyway. So that was really big. I thought NASCAR did a great job. We got 4 wide in several different instances, and we thought that was going to be the most exciting we saw of the day, was the 4 wide racing. Not the same situation. Now, I did also want to point out before we get to the end, there was some strategy differences here. Some cars that went with track position, some cars that went with the pit stops. It wasn't as much of a fuel mileage consideration as Daytona was, which I think was a nice change of pace. I think people were kind of sick of that, especially the way the Xfinity race ended, which, by the way, had a lot of fuel mileage in it as well. So that was cool to see, and I thought there was some real, unique ideas around how cars were going to get to the front. We start coming down the stretch, and I had it written down. I said, Chase Briscoe's going to wreck the field. Like, I just thought Briscoe was all over the place in that 14 car, and I didn't really know what he was trying to accomplish, moving up and down, kind of throwing some massive blocks when we still had, 20, 30 laps to go. And eventually, Briscoe does end up wrecking. And so that was one of those where you go, man, you can just see he is too aggressive, and maybe it's a matter of his car doesn't, he doesn't have as much control as he wants. Maybe he's too loose. But I felt like that one was coming, and it finally did come. Fortunately, it didn't take out half the field the way the early wreck did. But Briscoe ends up wrecking. And after that, you kind of think, okay, maybe we're going to get into one of those caution fests here where we have 4 or 5 because everybody's being so aggressive at the end, they're not going to be able to keep it clean. We go clean. I mean, we got great racing all the way down the stretch. And, so many different moves being made, so many cars. And again, the ability to use the bottom lane and the high lane, I thought was just perfect. It made the racing so intriguing. And we get it on the last lap. Blaney's leading, and he's throwing some huge blocks. I mean, Ryan Blaney, the defending series champion, I thought was outstanding, really doing almost everything he could. But in that last lap, you finally see Suarez, who was really quiet all day. And we've talked, at lengths about how much pressure Daniel Suarez is under this season. He was kind of quiet throughout the day, just didn't really get involved in anybody's messes. And all of a sudden, he's there on the outside. Kyle Busch is on the inside. And, they're kind of trying to set up their moves for a couple of laps. I thought you saw that, and I thought they both did a really good job of being patient enough. And, they talked to Kyle Busch afterwards, and they talked to Ryan Blaney about what more they could have done. And neither one of them had, like, a real strong thing, like, oh, I should have done this. They kind of were like, it is what it is. I had maybe a chance here to do something slightly different. But that last lap, they go 3 wide. They come around turn 4, still 3 wide. And we get the closest finish in the history, or one of the closest finishes in history in NASCAR, the closest 3-wide finish with 3 cars at the line. It's too close to call. It looks like Blaney's got it to the naked eye. And I thought Blaney won right off the jump, but I still kept thinking, man, Suarez was right there on the high side, and sometimes that angle can be a little deceiving if the camera's off center. Again, this is all real time. I'm thinking this stuff, and there you go. Suarez ends up winning it by 3 1/1000ths of a second. So that is unbelievable. And there's so many different storylines to get into here. For one, he had the defending series champ, Ryan Blaney, who I think a lot of us are, pegging for a big season to follow that up. He's right there. He's in the catbird seat for a large portion of the last part of that race. How about the fact that they went green? I mean, no wrecks, clean racing, which I think, the traditional NASCAR fan can really appreciate something like that. And then we still got the dramatic finish. It's not often it happens like that organically. And I know some might suggest maybe it's not the most organic thing in the world because of the configuration in Atlanta, bringing these cars together the way they do at Talladega and Daytona. But, man, it was so impressive to see. And Suarez just gets it by inches. So now the big discussion, Daniel Suarez, who's under so much pressure. We talked about, they've got guys, Shan Van Gisbergen, they've got guys in their facility who can replace him. And he goes out and wins a race to kind of shut up the doubters, at least for now. And I thought that was so cool to see. You saw the piñata celebration. I don't know if it's there yet with Ross Chastain's watermelon thing, but I appreciate that both Trackhouse drivers are trying to have some, a signature moment here, a la Carl Edwards with the backflip back in the day. But he gets the huge win. You saw Justin Marks out on the track afterwards, and just an impressive overall day at Atlanta. I mean, I don't know how we're going to top it. Again, one of the greatest races I've ever seen in NASCAR, and that goes back a long way for me. I mean, almost 20 years of watching the sport. So, that was impressive. Now, how do we follow that up? We go to Las Vegas, and this is really interesting for a lot of different reasons. Because, for one, you're going to your first 1.5 mile traditional speed-based racetrack, right, where the speed of the car is going to be the most likely determinant of who the contenders are, as opposed to, some of the luck and combination of speed and luck and driver ability that we have at the super speedways, or the drafting tracks as they now call them. That means we get a really good idea this week of what the rest of the season looks like, because we have a lot of 1.5 miles on the track on the schedule, more so than any other type of track. So this is also our first look at the Fords and the Toyotas with the new body styles at the 1.5 mile racetracks, which is going to be important. And we'll see if Chevy can look, how they looked last year. I think this is big for a lot of different drivers. I'm not even going to go through the standings yet, because I think through 2 weeks now, there's some funny names way up at the top. You got some guys in the top 10, the top 12, top 15, like, Corey LaJoie's up there. You got some guys at the bottom in Austin Dillon that are just really struggling, but there's still time for everyone pretty much to recover and or surge. There was some penalties before I get back to Las Vegas that came down here for Stewart-Haas Racing. The 41 and the 10 car, so Ryan Preece and Noah Gragson both penalized, I think, 35 points. Noah Gragson's in negative points after 2 weeks because of that penalty. it's just tough. I don't like the points penalties. I wish you could do as much as but they have to discourage what's going on, which is, bending the rules to find an advantage, right? For a long time in NASCAR, they let a lot of this stuff go. They can't do it when they have the cars the same situation now. So it was interesting to see the penalties come down. We saw this last year with Hendrick. We saw this last year with Stewart-Haas. That's going to put them behind the 8 ball, and we'll see if they can recover from it. They'll have a chance at Vegas. Now, I don't think the Fords are going to be the fastest manufacturer. I would lean with the Chevys, and maybe that's just more of not knowing what the Toyotas and Fords are going to look like with the new body style. I think the Chevys have a big week. And if I'm going to go ahead and make a pick for this race, I'm picking Kyle Larson. I think Larson's a guy, he doesn't love the drafting track, so we know that. He hasn't had a disastrous start to the season, but I think he gets into the winner's circle here at Las Vegas. And this is going to be a fun one. Again, this is the one if you're trying to say, okay, through 2 weeks, here's the cars that have performed well. Well, that gives them a jump start, but that doesn't really give you an indicator of how fast they're going to be. This is the week to kind of find some of that out, and I think we will. And for me, I think Hendrick's going to show you why they're the best in the sport more times than not, and I think Kyle Larson gets it done. So that'll do it for this week's episode of the 4-Tire Change. So much fun last week. Appreciate all the support. Continue to like, comment, subscribe, please. Next week, we'll get back into kind of the guest rotation here where we'll have somebody on talking to me about Las Vegas, and we'll even probably get that guest opinion on Atlanta going back a little bit because of how exciting it was. So until then, signing out.